This is an Ice Guys Patreon exclusive.
Welcome to another Ice Guys team preview video, team season preview video for the upcoming 2024-2025 NHL season. Ian Cameron, Alex B. Smith, and we are rotating a bunch of various guests for every team preview video, people that are either fans of the team, follow the team, cover the team. And I think it should have been a no-brainer. You've obviously not been paying attention or watching the show closely. Didn't figure out who we were going to choose to join us here for the Boston Bruins team preview video. Longtime friend of ours. Of course, you can watch him on the Eye Test with Pierre Maguire on YouTube. Former, and he's still on the show, of course, the Ice Guys throughout the season on Fridays. Jimmy Murphy joining us to help us talk a little Boston Bruins for the upcoming season. Jimmy, good to see you again.
Good seeing you guys. How's the summer been?
It's been good. And for the Boston Bruins, they're hoping that it's been a good summer as well, as trying to improve on what they did last year. A Boston Bruins team that got to the second round, beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in a very entertaining 7-game series. Of course, the Pasternak winner in overtime. They end up losing, of course, in the second round to the eventual Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. No shame in that. But you look at the Bruins, just briefly looking back to last year, they were a team that early in the season, power play was rolling. It kind of fell back to middle of the pack, by the end of the season. But they did remain, tried and true Boston Bruins, a top 10 penalty kill, a top 5 defensive team as far as goals against per game last season. That remained pretty steadfast, pretty constant. If you look at this team going into the season here, though, some changes, the big additions, I guess you could say, a pair of Canucks finding their way now onto the Boston Bruins. Elias Lindholm to shore up the center ice position for this Bruins team. They add Big Z, although he doesn't want to be called that because he wants to be respectful to Zdeno Chara, the former Bruin, Nikita Zadorov. But boy, he's got a lot of Zdeno Chara in his game. Physical defenseman, stay at home. Obviously, a guy that also has been able to chip in some offense, as we saw in the playoffs with the Vancouver Canucks. Does have that, believe it or not, in his repertoire. Starting up front, you've got obviously Lindholm, Charlie Coyle. I'm sure Matt Patra is going to get a greater look this season, maybe in a regular duty now in the center ice position. We'll see how that goes as their top 3. Pavel Zacha, I thought, was a bright part of the Bruins team for extended stretches last year. I loved the acquisition prior to last year of Geekie. Morgan Geekie, I thought, had a very solid year for this Bruins team. And when you talk about still looking to try to fill the void of prior to last season, losing a Patrice Bergeron, losing a David Krejci, at the center ice position, that's going to be looked upon as, are you going to be able to get enough? Does Lindholm, adding him alone, going to help? Can Coyle play well? Can Patra really step in as a young player at that center ice position and perform at a high level immediately? All valid questions. Trent Frederick, of course, Justin Brazeau, who got extended looks last year, going to fill out the forward group. Of course, Pasternak, what can you say? An incredible season last year, over 100 points once again. Brad Marchand, of course, the captain, still a very predominant, important player for this Bruins team, not only on the ice, but off the ice, what he can do. I love the blue line as far as what they've got. Zadorov. Charlie McAvoy, look, had his ups and downs at times last year, but the guy wears his heart on his sleeve. I have no doubt he'll still have a solid season. Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo, mainstays now for Boston the last few years on that blue line. My guy, we've done the Mason Lowry. He's probably going to get a regular look this year on the blue line. And I liked Andrew Peeke, the guy they got from Columbus. He stepped in. He obviously had an injury situation, but thought he gave them good minutes. And now they have depth. You look at that's your projected 6, and that's not even mentioning Parker Wotherspoon and Ian Mitchell, who got playing time last year because they had some injuries back there. Of course, the big change in net is the fact that Linus Ullmark is gone to the Ottawa Senators, and that means, well, we think Jeremy Swayman takes over as the number 1 goalie, but we know there's contract dispute going on right now between him and the Bruins. We'll see if that gets ironed out. Obviously, they want him to be the number 1 guy. He proved for much of last year, especially in that great playoff run, that he's probably capable of being a number 1 guy at this stage of his career. Will that contract get done? We'll start with Jimmy on this because he's the guy that knows this Bruins team well. Your overall views and outlook for the Bruins in the upcoming season.
Look, I mean, I looked at last year as almost like I thought they were going to kind of be teetering again on the wild card slot and just making it in maybe, or being that 7 or 8 team. But this year, heading in, I do see them definitely making the playoffs and at least winning one round. Do they make it past the second round where they fizzled out last year? I'm not sure. But on paper, I like this team to at least be a second round team, potentially a conference final team. I don't think they're a legit Stanley Cup contender just yet. You mentioned the center position there. I think Elias Lindholm is going to be their number one center. I think he can click with Pasternak and put up some number one center points, but the insane comparisons people are making here in Boston, namely Don Sweeney, I just don't think it was fair to Elias Lindholm to do it. Comparing him to Patrice Bergeron as a complete player, 200-foot guy. I don't know what Elias Lindholm he's been watching the last few years, but that's not him. He's not Patrice Bergeron. He's never going to be Patrice Bergeron. Can he fit into a system and improve his defensive play? Yeah, I think he can. But he, on a legit Stanley Cup contender, he's a 2C. Now, you brought up Zadorov, who I think could end up being an even bigger addition than Lindholm, because what he does is he gives them so much flexibility there in the top four. Now they can decide, do you want to pair Zadorov with McAvoy, or do we want to move Hampus Lindholm up, slide Zadorov down to play with Carlo, and have Hampus Lindholm play with McAvoy, which they did a lot down the stretch and in the playoffs last year. And that's a pretty formidable duo to have. But they have the flexibility to move those guys up and down. I think it's going to free up Charlie McAvoy. I know a lot of people were upset with his offensive production, upset with his playoff performance, but really he was not that bad. And I think the one thing he's missing has been a dependable guy on the left side there. Somebody that he knows can take up some of the physicality there, can do that booming shot from the point, and let him kind of be the floater or what they call the rover, so to speak, and go down there and pinch and make some offensive plays. So I think Zadorov may end up helping even more than Lindholm. And, you bring up Swayman. I think he'll get signed. I don't know if it's going to happen before camp. I know that they're still pretty far apart. I can tell you that the reports out of WEI in Boston yesterday that he's asking for $10 million are bullshit. It's not true. Did he start at $10 million? Did he come in and, well, that's what you do, right? When you're negotiating, you start high, you're going to get it. Yeah. And I think they know that the realistic meeting point, the common ground, is somewhere in the 7.5 to 8 million range per season. And I think that's where they're rounding out right now. And maybe Swayman's agent, who is, he's a stubborn guy. He orchestrated the longest holdout since the cap era. And that was William Nylander in 2018, went all the way to December 1st to 3 p.m. of that day before signing. So he's not afraid to dig down deep, but I think eventually they'll come to an agreement before the season kicks off.
Yeah, I think so too. He's just too important, and he played so well that the Bruins and the Jeremy Swayman camp are going to find a way to get it done, especially now that Linus Ullmark is out of the picture too, and now the pathway's clear, for Jeremy Swayman to get the throne, if you will, as the number one goaltender with the Boston Bruins. Alex, your thoughts on the Bruins this season?
When I look at the lineup, just the projected starting lineup, they look like a puzzle team. What I mean by that is all the pieces in one place and everybody in their right slots, they look like a really good hockey team. But we all know in the course of an 82-game season, that's not how that always works. How are they going to be able to balance injuries? How are they going to be able to balance, like I said, if they have issues with Swayman and his contract that go a little bit longer than they'd like? How do things shake out then? And that's where it gets a little bit dicey. Their depth has been an issue for quite some time. Obviously, being as good of a team as Boston's been over the last 2 decades, they have to really work harder to draft well because they aren't getting the lottery picks year in and year out. So they've done a good job of navigating that and bringing in young players, but just how deep is that pipeline should the injury start to mount? And we're talking about, key guys like, Brad Marchand, who's 35 going on 36. You add in a Zadorov, you bring in a Korpisalo, who's an older veteran backup as well. So if any of those pieces that look good in the opening lineup and the perfect lineup that you want, it looks good then, but how can they navigate and change? And when you're talking about an Atlantic division that's obviously getting more and more competitive by the year, you still have the Tampa Bay and Toronto's hanging around. You got Florida that has now emerged as a power in that division, and you got Ottawa, Buffalo, and Detroit rounding out the back end, trying to make something out of it. So Boston's always going to be pushed to the brink. they're going to get every team's A game virtually every night. So how they can navigate and weather that storm, it'll be interesting to see. I think this is a solid team, but like I said, I don't know if they really shake out to be one of the top 3 teams in the Atlantic. I could see them being maybe kind of in that wild card spot, but once they get into the playoffs, they have the right build, and if they're healthy enough to at least make things difficult in that first round, and like I said, possibly even get out of the first and make it to a second round.
Yep.
And in regards to the throw it out there, the point total for the Boston Bruins currently 99.5. I ain't betting that under. This has been a 100-point team in the 3 seasons following the pandemic year. Of course, the incredible 135 points they had a couple years ago, but last year 109. They had a 107-point season. Like, they have been a 100-point team 3 straight seasons, the Boston Bruins. So I think the betting markets are a bit more. And are there concerns? Yes. But this is a stable franchise as far as culture that has been developed with the Bruins. Swayman showed me enough that even if there's questions with the depth in the offense, there's no doubt. Because if you look at the statistical numbers of the Bruins last year, you had Pasternak with the incredible 110 points, Brad Marchand 67, Coyle 60, Zacha 59, and then there's a drop-off. There is, after those 4. So are you going to get your depth of scoring? But this is a team that relies on steady on their own end, always a top-tier penalty-killing team, top-tier defensive team. Like I said, top 5 in goals against last year, top 10 PK last year again. Mm-hmm. A goaltender in Jeremy Swayman that, assuming they get him signed and he's the number 1 guy, showed you what he can do, especially in the playoffs. So I don't know. The betting mark, and I have questions about Boston this year. A few. Alex does. Jimmy, I'm sure, does. But it feels like the betting markets have devalued them a little bit too much, because 99.5 points for their regular season point total for a team that has been a 100-point team 3 straight seasons feels a little low to me. So I would lean. Doesn't mean I'm betting the over, but I'm definitely leaning in that direction with the Boston Bruins point total.
I think it's correlated too, right? Like if you think the Bruins miss the playoffs, then you bet that under now. If you're on the fence, kind of like we all seem to be, or you like this Bruins team to make the playoffs, you'd either go over, or you can even wait. That's the beauty of betting now these days. We can bet these point totals throughout the entire year. So yeah, right at the 100-point mark. But if they get off to a couple wins early in the year, and you still think this team, like I said, has some issues with the depth, might have some issues and in certain points, wait for that number to climb up and then hit the under. So that's the thing. That's something I'll be doing with probably a few teams this year, or something that we haven't had the option of doing over the last couple of seasons, waiting for some point totals rather than just jumping in and being set on a number before the season starts.
Good point. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, guys, they're a 100-point team. They're going to be right around there. And I would, if I was going to do it now, I'm not going to do anything right now, but I'm with Alex, maybe wait a bit. But I do, if a gun put to my head, I'd say, over 99.5.
That's kind of, I think, where we're all at. Am I loving over 99.5? But this does feel low considering what we perennially have gotten from the Boston Bruins.
And I mean, just in general, point totals around the league are going up every year, right? I mean, you're seeing more teams hitting that century mark,
especially with so many damn overtime games. And how do we know that? All the friggin' draws we cast last year.
So it's not, if this was 10 years ago, maybe you look at that, you're like, whoa. But to me, it's common now. It's not a huge thing. And I think that's why when you look at the value there on both sides, it's just minus 110, or so, minus 120, minus 110 there. So I'm looking at DraftKings, by the way.
Right.
So I think that's the way it goes. I mean, I don't think it's a bold bet, but it's a smart bet to put them where they are going in that 100-point mark. The one thing I will say though, now I still think they get to 100 points, but I think in terms of seeding for the playoffs and getting home advantage, and this goes for other teams in the division as well, whether it's the Maple Leafs, the Panthers, the Lightning. Alex referenced Ottawa, Buffalo, and Detroit. They have been knocking on the door for a while now. They're more than ready to burst through and grab a final wild card spot there. I think regardless of if they do, they all rise in points. So they're going to be taking some points that maybe the Bruins or a team, around the 100-point mark there would have gotten last year. I think there's going to be games, especially, and we say this all the time, guys, and we know it holds true, especially in that final quarter of the season when maybe it starts to look like things are going the wrong way for one of those. They're scrappy. Those teams always steal those points at the end, right? And so that's why I'd be a little worried that maybe all those point totals come down a bit in the division, because I think on paper, and people may disagree, I think on paper the Atlantic Division is the most competitive division heading into this season.
Yep.
It's right up there, in my
agree.
opinion. Yep.
Completely agree. They will beat the crap out of each other late, and that's the key. It's funny, that's a footnote I have just for the overview of the season, and I'll talk about it involving Atlantic teams. But when we talk about draw season, the second half of the year, and teams that are looking to battle for points and play close games, all these teams are built to play that way too. They will shut things down if it's 2-2 or 3-3 with 5 minutes left. Every team in that division is balanced enough defensively to slow things down if they need to. So we could see a lot of overtime to shootouts in divisional matchups. That's probably something I haven't done that as often in the last couple of years, but I would just be kind of looking automatically at any Atlantic Division interdivision game past the once we get out of that Four Nations tournament. That's probably something you just automatically look for a draw and move ahead with.
Anybody interested in division, conference, or Stanley Cup futures with Boston? I'm personally not. I'm passing. Alex, you?
No, nothing. Like I said, nothing as of note right now. There's a couple of teams I like to win this division, but like I said, they'll be competitive, and point totals after the season starts, something I'll probably be doing more than anything else.
They're in the plus 450 to plus 500 range, Boston, to win the Atlantic, for those of you interested. Jimmy, do you have any thoughts there with the futures on Boston, or just, let's wait and see how it goes to start?
Yeah, I'm kind of a wait and see there. I look at that again, I think this is the most competitive division going. And, a lot of people keep talking about the demise of Tampa Bay, but yet they go out and they get Jake Gensel, and you got to think that Vasilevsky is going to bounce back this year and want to shut people up after the year he had. So they're right there again, and so I just think right now it's a complete toss up as to who takes that division.
Great stuff. There's your Boston Bruins team preview for the upcoming season. Alex B. Smith, Jimmy Murphy, Ian Cameron. This has been the Boston Bruins team preview right here on the Ice Guys, a Patreon exclusive. Thanks for joining us. Many more team previews on the way.